The Himalayas, the roof of the world. A place where clouds live below your feet and the wind carries sounds that have no source. Millions of people look at these mountains from a distance and feel a sense of awe. But the men who have actually walked those ridges, the ones who have camped alone at 18,000 feet in the dark, they feel something else entirely. They feel watched, they feel followed, and some of them come back with stories that they wish they could forget. These are 3 of those stories, told by the men who lived them, if you can call it living. I have been climbing in the Himalayas for 11 years. I have summited 6 peaks above 6,000 meters. I have been caught in whiteouts, survived an avalanche on Kedarkantha, and once spent 3 days trapped in a snow cave above the Gangotri Glacier. None of it prepared me for what I encountered on the north face of a peak I will not name. There are reasons the locals do not name it. I understand those reasons now. It was my 3rd solo attempt. I had done this route twice before with a team, but this time I wanted to be alone. I wanted the silence. That was my first mistake. I set up my camp at approximately 5,400 meters on a narrow ledge facing north. It was September. The skies were unusually clear for that time of year. I remember thinking how lucky I was. The stars were extraordinary, so bright they cast faint shadows on the snow. I made soup, checked my gear, wrote in my journal, and fell asleep by 8:30. I woke at 2 in the morning for no reason I could explain. Not a sound, not a shift in temperature. I just opened my eyes, wide awake, with a certainty that something was wrong. I lay still and listened. The wind had completely died. For anyone who has spent time at altitude, you know how rare that is. The silence above 5,000 meters is not peaceful. It is wrong. It is the kind of silence that makes your ears ring with the absence of everything. Then I saw the light. It was outside my tent, moving slowly. Not a headlamp. I know what a headlamp looks like. This was softer, diffused, almost like something glowing from within rather than a beam. I thought, rescue operation, another climber in trouble. I unzipped my tent slowly and looked out. There was a figure, standing about 30 meters from my tent on the snow slope, perfectly still, no gear that I could see, no jacket, no pack, wearing what looked like cloth, long, loose white cloth, completely exposed in conditions where the temperature had dropped to -20 Celsius. I called out, nothing. I called again, nothing. The figure did not move. I will tell you what I should have done. I should have stayed in my tent. I should have zipped it back up, lain down, and not moved until morning. But I am a trained mountaineer. You do not leave someone standing exposed on a slope at -20 in the middle of the night. So I put on my boots, grabbed my torch, and started toward the figure. I had taken maybe 10 steps when the light went out. I swept my torch across the slope. Nothing. No footprints other than my own. No depression in the snow where someone had been standing. In fresh snow at that angle, with that temperature, you cannot stand somewhere and leave no mark. It is physically impossible, but there was nothing. I stood there on that slope in the dark at 2 in the morning for a full minute, my torchlight shaking, and I felt, I have no other word for this, I felt a presence directly behind me, close enough that I thought I would feel breath on my neck. I spun around, nothing. I ran back to my tent. I did not sleep again that night. In the morning, I packed my camp and descended. I told myself it was hypoxia. Altitude plays tricks on the mind. I had told myself this before, and it had worked. But here is the thing I have not told anyone until now. When I reached the base camp, the local man who runs the tea stall at the trailhead, an older man, probably 70, who has lived his entire life in the shadow of that peak, he looked at me as I walked in. He looked at my face, and without me saying a single word, he said, "You saw the one who waits on the north face." I asked him what he meant. He said nothing more. He just made me tea and would not meet my eyes. I have not attempted a solo climb since.
I am not a climber.
I want to make that clear from the beginning. I am a porter. I have been carrying loads on mountain trails in Himachal Pradesh since I was 17 years old. I know these mountains the way you know your own house. Every step, every shortcut, every place to shelter when the weather turns. I do not scare easily. You cannot do this work if you scare easily. So when I tell you what happened to me on the Rotang approach in the autumn of 2019, I need you to understand that I am not an imaginative man. I am a practical man, a man who has seen real danger many times and knows the difference between a problem and a ghost story. What I encountered on the Rotang approach was not a problem. It was not something I could fix with rope or with rest. It was something else. I was on my way back from a supply drop, moving fast because I wanted to reach the village before dark. My load was lighter on the return, maybe 15 kilograms. I know that trail well enough to walk it in my sleep, and I was moving on instinct, my mind empty, the way it gets after a long day at altitude. The trail runs alongside a deep crevice section for about 400 meters. On one side, the path. On the other side, a drop of maybe 60 meters into a narrow ice channel. I had passed it hundreds of times without a second thought. I was about halfway along that section when I heard it. A voice from the crevice. Not screaming, not crying, talking, calm even, like someone carrying on a normal conversation. The sound was clear enough that I stopped immediately and looked down into the ice. It was dusk. I had my torch. I could see the walls of the crevice, blue-white ice, maybe 2 meters at the top, narrowing as it descended into darkness. Nothing, but the voice continued. And then, I cannot explain this without it sounding like I am lying, but I swear on my children, the voice said my name. Not hello or help me, my name, Devraj, in a tone I recognized. The tone of someone calling you for dinner. The tone of someone who expects you to come. I took one step toward the edge without thinking. That is the part that still terrifies me. I did not decide to step forward. My body just moved, like a reflex. One foot lifted and moved toward the edge of that 60-meter drop. I caught myself. I grabbed the rock face with both hands and pressed my back against the mountain, my heart hammering, my legs shaking. I stayed like that for what felt like a very long time. The voice had stopped the moment I caught myself, as if whatever was speaking had gotten what it needed from me in that one step, as if the goal was simply to make me move. I shouted into the crevice, "I hear you! I am not coming!" I do not know why I said those words. They came from somewhere instinctive. The silence that followed was absolute. I did not run. Running on that trail in the near dark would have killed me faster than anything in that crevice. I walked, deliberately, my hand on the rock face the entire time, my eyes forward, until I was past that section and on flat ground. When I told the other porters that evening, one of the older men, a man who has worked the Himachal routes for over 40 years, he nodded slowly when I described the voice saying my name. He said there were stories from the old days, climbers who had fallen, soldiers who had been lost in the passes during the war. He said sometimes the mountain keeps people, not their bodies, something else. He said the thing in the crevice calls to the living because it is lonely. I have taken a different route past that section every time since, a longer route, an hour longer. I do not care. I want to start by saying that I was the last person in the world who believed in any of this. I am a travel writer. I have trekked in 22 countries. I have a science degree. I am not superstitious. I have always been slightly impatient with people who attribute their own fear responses to the supernatural. I believed all those rational things right up until October of last year, when I spent a night at the end of a trail that was not on any map. I was doing research for a piece on lesser-known treks in the Spiti Valley. I had hired a local guide for 3 of the 5 days, but on day 4, I decided to go ahead alone on a short side trail I had spotted on the topographic sheet, a path that seemed to lead to a viewpoint overlooking the main valley.
My guide had not mentioned it. I assumed he simply did not know it. The trail was narrow and old, clearly not used regularly, but it was well defined and the weather was clear, and I was experienced enough to know my limits. I set off at 7 in the morning. By noon, I had been walking for 5 hours, and the viewpoint showed no sign of appearing. The trail had begun to climb rather than level out, heading toward a high saddle I had not expected. I was about to turn back when I came around a large boulder and stopped dead. There was a monastery. It was small, maybe 8 or 10 rooms, built in the traditional Spiti style, with whitewashed mud brick walls and a single wooden doorway painted dark red. Situated on a narrow shelf of rock, with the mountain rising sheer behind it and a drop of several hundred meters in front. There was no visible path down from the saddle on the other side, no route in other than the one I had just walked, a dead end. And in a dead end, you do not build a functioning monastery unless it has been abandoned. But it was not abandoned. There was smoke coming from one of the windows, and prayer flags, fresh ones, their colors still bright, snapping in the wind. I knocked on the wooden door. It opened immediately, as if someone had been standing just inside. A monk, old, extremely old, the kind of old where you stop guessing and accept that this person has been here longer than seems reasonable. He looked at me with no surprise whatsoever, as if foreign trekkers arrived at this impossible location regularly. He gestured for me to enter. I entered. The interior was a single large room, lit by butter lamps and a small hearth. There were thangka paintings on every wall, a large bronze statue of a figure I did not recognize, not any of the common Tibetan Buddhist iconography I knew. The monk brought me tea without asking. He did not speak. I tried Tibetan, Hindi, and my very poor Spiti dialect. He said nothing, but his eyes were entirely attentive, watching me with an expression I can only describe as patient. I stayed for perhaps 2 hours. I showed him my map. He looked at it for a long time, and then placed his finger on a spot well outside the boundaries of the paper, off the edge, and looked at me. I asked if I could stay the night. He shook his head, very firmly. He stood and walked to the door and opened it, and the quality of his gesture made it clear that this was not a suggestion. I left. I walked back down the trail as the sun was dropping. I made camp at a lower altitude and slept soundly. In the morning, I pulled out my camera to review the photos I had taken of the monastery. Every single photo I had taken of the monastery was blank, not corrupted. The metadata showed that photos had been taken, but the images themselves were completely white, overexposed beyond recovery, as if something impossibly bright had been directly in front of the lens each time I had pressed the shutter. Even the exterior shots, taken in ordinary afternoon shadow. When I returned to the village and described the monastery to my guide, he became very still. He asked exactly where on the trail. I showed him. He said there was no monastery on that trail. He had walked that trail himself as a young man. There was nothing there. I described the building in detail, the old monk, the red door, the unfamiliar statue. My guide said nothing for a while. Then he said there was an old story about a place in the high Spiti where the boundary between what is and what was becomes thin, where travelers sometimes stumble into a time that is not their own. He said the monks that were there, they had been there for a long time. They were caretakers of the boundary, and the reason the old monk made me leave before nightfall was not rudeness, it was protection. I am a travel writer. I write things down. I published this account in a magazine, and the editors made me change it to fiction. They said readers would not accept it as fact. That is fine. I know what I saw. And somewhere in the high Spiti, at the end of a trail that does not appear on any map, a very old monk in a monastery that should not exist is still making tea and waiting with absolute patience for whoever comes next.
3 men, 3 mountains, 3 encounters that do not have rational explanations, at least not explanations any of them have been able to find. The Himalayas are the youngest mountain range on Earth, still rising by a few millimeters every year, still pushing upward. The locals will tell you the mountains are alive.
The scientists will tell you that is a metaphor. But the men in these stories, the climber, the porter, the writer, they will tell you the same thing the locals do. And they will say it quietly, with their eyes down, the way you speak about something that might be listening. Stay safe, and if you ever find yourself on a trail that seems to go nowhere, or hear your name called from a dark place, or see a light on a slope where no light should be, trust the feeling in your gut before you trust your logic. The mountains have been here far longer than our explanations for them. Whatever is up there has been here longer still. Sleep well.